Her bedroom door splinters open as her violent stalker hunts her down. But he doesn't hear the screeching tires of a Mafia hit squad pulling up outside. She's locked in the bathroom, clutching her child, praying to a 911 dispatcher who is moving way too slow. But she made a second phone call, to a man who doesn't use sirens, to a man who solves problems by making people vanish into thin air. By the time the abuser realizes he's trapped, the kingpin is already kicking down the front door. Picture this with me. The rain is coming down hard on downtown Hartford. A ruthless Mafia boss never handles low-level job interviews. Yet here we are, Kyle, a man who built an underground empire on pure silence, sits across from Celine. She is a terrified young woman wearing cheap clothes like a fragile suit of armor. His right-hand man tosses resumes away like dead leaves then. Celine shifts, her sleeve slips. Kyle spots them immediately, dark purple fingerprints bruised deep into her wrist. A violent ghost wakes up inside his chest. He hires her right there, stick with me tonight. Because saving her is about to flip his entire criminal syndicate upside down. Sometimes, pulling someone out of the dark pulls your own world apart. Dante is openly annoyed, sliding her thin folder across the polished table and complaining that she is 20 minutes late. Kyle does not even blink. The man has a massive criminal syndicate to run. He has illegal shipments to reroute, and a local politician who needs a reminder that loyalty is mandatory. So why is the Underworld king sitting in on a low-level interview? He needed to look legitimate for the day. That massive corporate building is nothing but a glass mask over a brutal network built on fear. The heavy door opens. Celine walks in, her shoulders rigid, looking like she is bracing for a physical blow. She is maybe 23, her dark hair pulled back tight. It reminds us that fear permanently changes how a person walks through the world. You can feel the heavy weight Celine is carrying the second she steps into the room. She is drowning in a white shirt meant for someone twice her size, her cheap black pants held together by desperate, hand-sewn stitches. But Kyle is not looking at her worn-out clothes. His dark eyes are locked onto her hands. They are trembling violently. You and I know that is not just normal interview nerves. That is the raw, vibrating energy of pure terror. Dante remains ice-cold, pointing out she dropped out of college after 2 semesters. When he asks why, her pause stretches a fraction of a second too long. She blames finances, but the words are hollow and rehearsed. Kyle hears the unspoken truth immediately. Desperation is a language he speaks fluently. Kyle did not become a Mafia don by accident. He spots a lie faster than a loaded gun in an alley. He senses instantly that Celine is not merely broke, she is running from a nightmare. Dante keeps turning the screws, tearing apart her weak history of diner shifts. Celine clenches her jaw so hard the bone jumps. For a second, Kyle waits for her to break. Instead, she lifts her chin, eyes flashing with desperate fire, and stares Dante down. She says she deserves the position because she shows up, keeps quiet, and works hard. Dante scoffs, dismissing it as bare minimum effort. Celine does not blink. She demands he let her prove it. Hardened killers usually crack under his stare, but this broken girl holds it. It goes to show that the deepest courage is born from the deepest despair. Kyle slices through the silence with a voice like cold steel, asking why she really wants the job. Celine flinches, her knuckles turning chalk white. The corporate mask shatters. She whispers that she simply needs it. It is the raw sound of a cornered animal choosing survival. Dante shakes his head, preparing to deliver a cold rejection. Celine stands up too fast, shaking as she grabs her things, but as she moves, her oversized sleeve slips. Kyle goes completely rigid. Stamped into her wrist is a violent bracelet of purple and yellow, the unmistakable shape of a man's cruel grip. She yanks the fabric down, turning away with the guarded movements of someone hiding shattered ribs. Kyle stands up. He tells her she starts Monday, sometimes. The silent scars scream the loudest. Celine stares at him like he has lost his mind. The tiny spark of hope in her eyes is instantly swallowed by dark suspicion. She asks him why. Her voice trembling, Kyle says nothing. He cannot tell a stranger that he recognizes the exact shape of her terror, because 20 years ago, he watched his own mother endure those same bruises in the gutters of their youth. He just tells her to be on time. She nods stiffly and hurries out. The moment the door clicks shut, Dante loses his mind. He warns that bringing damaged goods into their operation is a fatal liability. Kyle shoots him a glare so frozen it sucks the air out of the room, ordering him never to use those words again. Dante backs off, muttering about her chaotic baggage. But the terrifying truth is, Dante is entirely right. That unspoken chaos is exactly what anchors Kyle's dark obsession to protect her. Hours later, the city lights fade, and Celine retreats to her miserable apartment in the decaying heart of the slums. It is a nightmare of flickering bulbs and heavy deadbolts. She hauls cheap groceries inside. The room is swallowed in shadows, lit only by the pale blue glow of a television. Her little boy, Noah, sits perfectly still on a ruined couch lost in cartoons. She asks if he is hungry, but the boy remains hollow and silent. Then, heavy boots thump against the bedroom floor. Celine's spine turns to ice. Her husband, Damon, emerges. He is massive. Fueled by cheap rage and bloodshot cruelty, his hands are permanently balled into fists, always waiting for an excuse to strike. Damon glares through the gloom, demanding to know where she has been. Celine fights to keep her voice steady, quietly reminding him about the job interview. He does not care. He stomps across the linoleum, reeking of stale beer and bitter failure. Pinning her against the counter, he spits venom, furious that she left him alone with their son. As he complains, his massive hand snaps to her face. He grabs her chin, fingers digging in hard enough to paint fresh bruises into her skin. Most people would scream or fight. Celine just swallows the pain, whispering an apology. She knows fighting a monster only feeds its rage. Listen to me tonight, friends. The most terrifying monsters do not hide in the shadows. They live in your own house, demanding your absolute surrender. It is sickening how fast a tyrant can pivot. The second she submits, Damon's brutal grip softens. He strokes the jaw he just bruised, playing the wounded victim, whispering that he just worries when she is away. It is a masterclass in emotional poison. Fast forward to Monday. The morning air is sharp and freezing. Celine stands trembling beneath the towering glass of Varley Holdings. She had kissed Noah goodbye at dawn while Damon was still snoring off his rage. She is wrapped in the same faded clothes, burying her fresh marks under a worn sweater. The lobby is a fortress, crawling with icy men in tailored suits who look more like hitmen than security guards. Celine steps forward, clutching her paperwork like a shield, walking blindly into a new incredibly dangerous life. Look at the gravity of this moment. Celine steps through those doors on day one, and the temperature instantly drops. A stone-faced guard inspects her ID, handing over a key card like he is passing off a loaded weapon. Up on the 14th floor, she is handed over to Margaret, a vicious corporate manager with a stare made of flint. Margaret drags Celine on a relentless march across 3 floors, barking out ruthless security protocols. They finally stop at a cramped, windowless office. Margaret shoves a heavy binder into Celine's chest, warning her that the untouchable Mr. Varley never handles low-level hires. She better not fail him. You and I both know the harsh truth about survival. Sometimes getting exactly what you prayed for is the most terrifying thing of all. Celine stands alone in that room, nursing a fragile spark hope, but here is the tragic twist. For 3 agonizing weeks, Kyle never shows his face. The boss is buried in blood-soaked Underworld deals high above her, yet he is always watching, in the dead of night. Bathed in the glow of his private monitors, he studies her security footage. He watches her arrive before the sun, eat in isolation, and vanish exactly at 5. Then the grim details surface, a dark shadow beneath fresh makeup, thick sweaters when the office is boiling hot. A heavy, painful limp she tries to mask. Kyle feels his blood freeze. It is his mother's tragic history repeating itself. Trauma leaves an eternal fingerprint on the soul, as long as you know where to look. Let the scene play out in your mind. The Underworld King Kyle glides into Margaret's office for a casual check-in. He asks about the new hire. Margaret's instincts flare up. She reports Celine is a ghost, highly efficient, but fiercely guarded, vanishing the second the clock strikes 5. When Margaret offers to spy on her, Kyle's eyes turn to ice. He shuts it down and walks away, but behind the corporate paperwork, Celine is secretly drowning. For 6 agonizing weeks she has painted on a brave smile, surviving shifts with bruised ribs and split lips. You and I have seen this tragedy before. The people smiling the brightest in the room are often fighting the darkest demons. You never truly know what kind of hell someone returns to when they leave the lights behind. Tonight, you and I are going to unpack a living nightmare. Picture Celine walking into her own kitchen, unaware it is a ticking time bomb. Her 4-year-old boy, Noah, accidentally spills a cup of juice, an ordinary mistake, but Damien has been drinking, and he unleashes a brutal backhand that sends the sweet boy flying, his tiny head cracking against the refrigerator handle. Blood spills on the floor. Celine goes feral. She scoops up her child, locking them in the bathroom while Damien hammers on the door, screaming about raising a weak son. Life teaches us a brutal truth here. Real weakness is a grown man taking his rage out on a defenseless child. True strength is a terrified mother shielding her baby from the monster they live with. Damien finally stumbles away, leaving Celine on the freezing bathroom tile. Right there in the dark, the illusion completely shatters. For 4 long years, she swallowed his twisted definitions of love and took the abuse. But seeing blood on your baby changes you forever. She realizes if she stays, Noah will grow up believing real men use their fists. Sometimes you cannot find the courage to save yourself. But fierce love for your child forces you to do the impossible. Fast forward to her afternoon shift. Celine is a walking ghost, hands shaking over her files. Then at exactly 4:47 p.m., the heavy door clicks open. Her boss, Cale, stands in the doorway like a towering shadow, entirely unaware he is about to rewrite her destiny. Celine jumps from her desk, her heart pounding as she stumbles over hollow, nervous apologies. Cale just gently pushes the door closed and locks his steady eyes on hers. He does not ask what happened, he simply drops the heavy truth. Telling her plainly that she is hurt, Celine tries to laugh it off, wrapping herself in that fragile armor of survival. But Cale sees right through the cracks. He tells her someone is hurting her, and the room grows suffocating. When he quietly asks if it is her boyfriend, the dam finally breaks. Celine collapses into silent tears. The cold boss melts away, leaving a man fighting his own rising fury. He looks at her trembling shoulders and says he can help. Life sends you an unexpected protector, exactly when you decide you are done being a victim. The offer of help hits Celine like a physical blow. Panic instantly floods her veins. She snaps at him, demanding he stay out of her business. Completely paralyzed by the thought of what Damien might do if another man intervened, she chokes out a desperate lie about a clumsy morning, then bolts past him. Cale does not chase her. For the first time in his 20 years ruling the streets, this untouchable king feels useless. Hours later, the city lights bleed through the windows of his quiet penthouse. Cale sits alone, his jaw clenched tight. Spread open beneath his hands is a thick manila folder. His men just handed him every ugly secret about the man sleeping in Celine's bed. It is a stark reminder that your darkest secrets will always eventually find the light. What is inside that folder is pure poison to the outside world. Damien plays the perfect gentleman, flashing a charming smile. But behind closed doors, he is a soul-crushing nightmare. Cale reads every terrible word while his closest man, Dante, begs to put a bullet in Damien tonight. 3 words from Cale, and the abuser ceases to exist. But Cale remembers the sheer terror in Celine's eyes. If he rains down blood right now, she will run from him too, so he chooses strategy over vengeance. He mobilizes his fixers, quietly building an invisible fortress to catch her when she finally falls sometimes. The absolute smartest move a person can make is sitting in the dark, waiting patiently for the exact right moment to strike. 3 long, painful weeks slowly tick by. For 21 days, Celine starts finding her voice again. She smiles in the break room, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. You might think the storm has finally passed. Then comes 2:17 in the morning. Cale's private phone glows in the pitch black. An unknown number. When he answers, he hears Celine's panicked whispers from a locked bathroom. Damien went into another rage. Noah is hurt, and there is blood. The second an innocent child pays the price, the rules burn to ash in one heartbeat. Cale sheds his restraint and becomes a ruthless predator. His voice drops to freezing temperatures, sharp and absolute. He tells her a car will be at her curb in exactly 8 minutes. Grab your papers, leave everything else and run. When true evil strikes, bold action is your only escape. Stick with me here, because the tension is absolutely suffocating. Celine is hyperventilating. Terrified Damien will wake up. Cale's voice cuts through her panic like a heavy blade, asking simply, "Do you trust me?" The line goes dead. Cale barks orders at Dante, demanding a car to East Hartford immediately. He grabs his pistol and walks out. He spent 2 decades building an empire, and he is risking it all for her. Back in the bathroom, Celine is trembling, shoving Noah's birth certificate and $57 from a secret box into her pocket. Listen to me carefully. If you ever find yourself hiding crumpled bills just to survive the person you share a home with, you need to leave. That is a brutal, necessary life lesson you can never afford to ignore. On the other side of that flimsy door, Damien is passed out in a drunken stupor, but Celine knows better than to feel safe. This man is a parasite with a twisted 6th sense for her fear. She already knows what comes next when he wakes to an empty bed. He will turn violent and play the victim. But then she glances down at Noah, who is silently holding a bloody towel to his head. That heartbreaking image burns her hesitation into ash. It proves a powerful truth. When a monster threatens your own flesh and blood, ordinary fear dissolves into pure survival instinct. She twists the shower knob off, The sudden silence in the apartment is heavy and terrifying. She slowly pulls the door open, stepping like a ghost into a living room illuminated only by the cold light of a muted television. Every muscle is coiled tight as she creeps past the bed. One agonizing step, then another. Suddenly, a sickening crack echoes. The floorboard betrays her. Damien groans, shifting heavily under the blankets. Her blood runs cold. Noah buries his face into her neck, holding on for dear life. For 5 torturous seconds, the world simply stops. Nobody breathes. Then, the abuser lets out a sigh and rolls over. Celine does not give him a chance to open his eyes. She crosses the room in 8 silent strides, snatches her coat, and turns the deadbolt. Her hands vibrate with adrenaline. She slips into the empty hallway, smelling the stale scent of burnt dinner. Turning her back on the miserable life she once begged to be loved in. Never beg for love from someone who only offers you pain. The heavy door clicks shut, leaving her history behind. She steps into the biting December wind. A black sedan idles silently. Marco steps out, built like a brick wall in a tailored suit. You can tell by his stance he breaks bones for a living. He tells her to get in. Celine freezes, realizing she is trading a domestic nightmare for a Mafia getaway car. But Marco spots the blood on Noah's head and softly suggests a hospital. Celine shuts it down. Hospitals mean police, and police mean dangerous questions. Marco understands immediately, promising they have an underground doctor waiting. Running out of options, Celine grips her child tight and climbs into the dark back seat. Sometimes trusting a stranger in the dark is far safer than staying with the devil you know. Her miserable apartment fades into the rearview mirror, but the relief never comes. Celine is paralyzed by the terror of what happens next. They pull up to a building that looks like a rotting laundromat, but when Marco unlocks the steel door, the illusion drops. Inside is a high-end bunker. Warm air rushes over them, and heavy curtains seal them away. Standing in the kitchen is Dr. Lim. Looking unfazed by this midnight rescue mission, she calmly asks Celine to bring the boy into the light. Noah has not made a sound since they left. He is entirely shut down, his wide eyes locked in the hollow stare of deep trauma. It breaks the soul to witness a child carry that kind of heavy burden. Children absorb our chaos, which is why protecting their peace must always be our highest priority. Dr. Lim operates with quiet precision. She cleans the boy's head, assuring them it is a mild concussion. Her eyes catch the dark bruises on Celine's wrists. She gently asks how the mother is holding up. Celine raises her walls, snapping that she is perfectly fine. The doctor recognizes the lie but lets it go, offering fresh clothes and food. Celine's exhausted mind rejects the kindness in her world. Nobody hands out safety for free. There is always a price. That is the tragedy of abuse. It trains you to suspect genuine compassion. An hour later, the heavy deadbolt clicks. Celine's heart drops. Terrified Damien has somehow hunted them down. The door swings open, but it is not her tormentor. It is Kale. The untouchable boss just walked in. Kale steps into the light looking different. The jacket is gone. Sleeves rolled up, radiating quiet, overwhelming power. His eyes remain sharp. Picking up the pain Celine tries to hide. Dr. Lim gives a nod about the boy and slips out, leaving them in heavy silence. Celine stares, struggling to accept an underground king risked everything for her. Her voice trembles as she asks, "Why are you doing this?" Kale sits down across from her, leaving safe space, and delivers a simple truth. Because you needed help. But surviving a monster makes you suspicious. She demands to know his agenda. What does he really want? Kale holds her broken gaze, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I want you safe." The emotional weight in that room is staggering. True safety is a rare gift. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected people. You and I are going to unpack this tragedy together. Kyle finally lets his icy exterior shatter. He leans close, the room heavy with grief, and tells Celine about his mother. For 15 agonizing years, she was trapped with a monster who shattered her bones and called it romance. When she escaped, she was a hollow shell. The coroner claimed heart failure, but Kyle knows pure terror stopped her heart. He was 17 when he vowed never to let another woman fall into that abyss. Overwhelmed, Celine weeps softly into her son's hair, whispering that she feels lost. Kyle's eyes soften. "You already did it," he murmurs. "You left, let this settle in your soul." Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is walking out that door, even when your hands are shaking and you are terrified. Kyle's absolute certainty should be a comfort, but it only sets Celine's nerves on fire. After 4 grueling years with a toxic man, she knows a dark truth. Men promising protection often just want control, wearing a different mask. Kyle outlines a survival plan with chilling precision. Rest, lawyers, full custody. He promises Damien will never find them. his voice dropping into a terrifying finality. Celine wants to scream that her ex is a relentless predator, but her bones are too heavy with exhaustion. She just nods. Kyle slips into the shadows, leaving a massive guard stationed at her door. Celine pulls her sleeping boy closer. Hear me on this. Doing the right thing rarely feels like a victory in the moment. Usually, it just feels like raw, agonizing survival. It is 6:43 in the morning. Damien wakes to a suffocatingly empty apartment. He checks the kitchen, stale air and heavy silence. Noah's bedroom is deserted. Then he sees the open closet, her clothes, her shoes, that hidden canvas bag vanished. Panic crashes over him. He dials her number, hands trembling, but only gets the dead click of voicemail. He leaves 2 frantic messages. Nothing answers. Reality bites down hard when he checks the bathroom. Her toothbrush and the stuffed rabbit are gone. His illusion of total control shatters in an instant. Roaring in anger, he slams his bare fist into the drywall, splitting his knuckles open. Let this be a warning. You never grasp the value of what you hold until it slips away, ruined by your own cruel hands. Damien is unraveling completely. Panicking, he calls her mother to ask if Celine is hiding there. Linda's voice is sharp. Why would she be here? Damien had isolated Celine so ruthlessly, she hadn't spoken to family in months. When he orders Linda to call him if she shows up, the line goes dead. Breathing heavy, his twisted mind is convinced Celine isn't smart enough to escape alone. He digs through her email and account he monitored with an iron grip and finds a message from Varley Holdings. Her new job. He remembers the quiet spark of hope in her eyes after that interview, and a dark obsession takes over. He snatches his keys, ready to burn her sanctuary to the ground. Never forget this truth. When you build a cage around someone, you only teach them how to fiercely hunt for the key. At 9:15, Damien pulls up to Varley Holdings, wearing the exact shirt Celine used to iron for him, the sheer arrogance of the man. He marches to the security desk and demands to see his girlfriend. The guard barely blinks. He checks an ID, murmurs into a phone, and delivers a flat rejection, desperate. Damien plays the grieving father card, trying to manipulate them with his missing son. The guard makes one call, and the atmosphere instantly shifts. He orders Damien off the property. Damien boils over, fists trembling as he screams into the quiet lobby, but the heavy doors remain firmly shut. Listen closely. Clear boundaries are your only true defense. Once a monster reveals their face, you build an iron wall and never let them breach it again. Stick with me, because this is where the air gets painfully thin. The lobby guard threatens to call the cops. Damien considers tearing the place apart, but cowardice wins out. He retreats to the sidewalk, glaring at the glass tower, choking on his rage. 14 floors above, Margaret warns Kyle that Celine's violent shadow has arrived. Kyle does not flinch. His voice is pure ice as he orders double security, demanding Damien's face at every entrance. Margaret asks if they are running a business or a witness protection agency. Both, Kyle replies softly, no hesitation. Let this sink in tonight. True leadership has nothing to do with managing a payroll. It is about fierce, unyielding protection. When you hold the power to shield the vulnerable from harm, you step up. Margaret warns Kyle that predators like Damien do not just fade away. This is a lethal game. Kyle's jaw tightens. Watch me. Pushed to the edge. Margaret invokes the ghost of Kyle's mother, claiming she would despise this. The room grows dead cold. Kyle whispers that she would understand exactly why the line must be drawn. Margaret storms out. Kyle pulls up the street cameras, watching Damien pace the concrete like a rabid dog before driving off in a rusted pickup. Kyle memorizes the plates and dials Dante, ordering round-the-clock surveillance on Damien. Dante hesitates, warning that this is dangerously personal. Hear this loud and clear sometimes. Doing the right thing means breaking every safe rule and willingly walking into the line of fire yourself. Dante reminds Kyle he is guarding a human being, not a corporate asset. Kyle's teeth grind together. Just do it. Dante sighs, warning that this war never ends clean. Miles away, Celine is drowning in paranoia. A passing car sends a violent shock through her chest. Dr. Lim examines young Noah. His physical bruises are fading, but his mind is trapped. The boy has gone mute. He refuses food unless Celine holds the spoon and panics if she leaves. The doctor calls it trauma regression, but Celine just sits in the quiet, overwhelmed by a crushing sense of failure. Remember, this deeply healing from abuse is never a straight path. It is incredibly messy. It takes immense patience, and you absolutely must forgive yourself along the way. Are you ready to see how she fights back? Patricia arrives on the 4th day. She is a lawyer with the cold eyes of a predator, here to forge a restraining order out of Celine's darkest secrets. She demands the ugly truth. Celine whispers that it started 4 years ago. Just screaming at first, then a fist through the drywall. Eventually, his heavy hands left deep bruises. Celine weeps, admitting she tried to convince herself it was an accident. Patricia's pen never stops. She coldly asks for the details of the physical and sexual violence, and Celine's voice completely shatters. Listen to me tonight, never ignore the tiny red flags. What starts as a broken wall almost always ends in a completely shattered life. Patricia asks the question that haunts every survivor: why didn't she report him? Celine's voice trembles. Damien convinced her the world would think she was crazy, and she believed her love could fix him. But you and I know the tragic truth. You can never heal a toxic soul with your own blood. Walking away is the only real victory. Patricia silently documents 2 hours of pure horror. The fractured ribs, the swollen eyes, the freezing January night he locked her out in the snow. Finally, the lawyer snaps her briefcase shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She will file the emergency orders at dawn. The law is now their shield. But Patricia drops a chilling reality check. A predator like Damien will not simply surrender. He will absolutely violate that protective order. Patricia warned her this would happen. She knew Damien would try to poison her family against her. And here is a truth you and I must hold on to: breaking out of a toxic cage is brutally hard. But refusing to walk back inside is the ultimate test of your soul. It takes exactly 7 hours for him to ignore the law. At 11:34, Celine's phone lights up the pitch-black room. The ringing never stops, bleeding into endless voicemails. He tries every trick first. He sobs like a victim. Then he flips, accusing her of stealing his son. Finally, the mask drops. He screams, swearing to hunt her down. 17 missed calls in 90 minutes. It is a terrifying masterclass in torture, leaving her trembling in the dark, utterly sick to her stomach. By the 18th ring, my nerves shattered. I snatched up the phone, my voice trembling as I demanded he stop. Damien slipped into his pathetic apologies, but I swung the hammer down. I told him I knew exactly what he did to our little boy, like a coward. He swore Noah just fell, whispering that I was crazy. I cut his gaslighting short, then the air froze. Damien let out a low, scraping laugh, asking who taught me to speak like that. A lawyer. Or maybe my new boss. My blood ran cold. How could he know about Kyle? Damien sneered, suggesting a man with Kyle's dark power does not protect women for free. He accused me of trading my body for safety. I slammed the phone down, breathless at the suffocating evil of the man I once loved. Here is the truth. Toxic people will always try to make your escape look like a sin. My hands shook so violently, the phone crashed to the hardwood, splintering the glass. I pulled my weeping son tight against my chest, whispering that everything was fine. But you and I both know that was a tragic lie. Damien knowing Kyle's name meant the monster was already in the shadows, watching us. By 7 the next morning, Kyle arrived at the safe house with breakfast, only to find me hollowed out by a sleepless night. I confessed that Damien called 17 times, explaining I only answered to make the ringing stop. The room turned to ice when I repeated the sick conversation and mentioned his name. Kyle's jaw locked tight. He saw the game instantly. My ex was fishing for intelligence, plotting to tear down my protector. It is a harsh reality of survival. Predators will always try to isolate you from your lifeline before they strike. I finally broke under the heavy weight of exhaustion. I looked at Kyle and asked if he was only here to protect his investment. Sick of feeling like a pathetic charity project, he just stared at me, the silence stretching until he finally spoke his painful truth. His mother was trapped in a 15-year nightmare with a monster. The neighbors heard her screams, but everyone looked away. At 7 years old, Kyle tried to step between them. His father shattered 3 of his ribs, growling that real men mind their own business. By the time Kyle grew strong enough to fight, his mother's spirit was completely gone. The doctors blamed heart failure, but Kyle knows the terror of that home killed her. The hardest lesson we ever learn is that looking the other way makes us an active part of the pain. Kyle looked deep into my eyes, his voice heavy. He told me I was not a project. I was the second chance he never got to give his own mother. I had to fight back tears as he made his only demand stay alive. But peace is a fragile thing. The restraining order held for exactly 4 days. By day 5, Damien tracked down my mother, appearing on her porch looking completely unhinged. She had not seen him since she first questioned the dark bruises on my arms. Damien spun his usual web, weeping fake tears about missing his little boy. But a mother's intuition is an absolute force. She looked right through his mask, telling him she knew exactly what he did. Damien flinched, the cold truth hitting him like a bullet. No amount of dark manipulation can ever break a parent's fierce protective love. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Damien stood on my mother's porch, eyes red, playing the broken man. But you and I know that was a hollow lie. The second his mask slipped, his tone turned icy. He boldly claimed that I was the real manipulator. He threatened my mother with a chilling warning, telling her not to act surprised when I came crawling back to him. The sudden darkness of his switch was terrifying. My mother called me in a panic, begging me not to fall for his trap. I swore I would never return, but deep in my bones, I was terrified I might. Listen to this truth: toxic individuals will always weaponize your own capacity for forgiveness. They count on your deep empathy to excuse their relentless cruelty. With the battle lines drawn, the clock officially started ticking down to a brutal custody war. For 6 agonizing weeks, I hid in the safe house, working under the protection of Kyle's dangerous syndicate. But Damien was desperate to drag me back. He made burner accounts, sent flowers, and lurked outside the daycare. He called my office 17 times, until Kyle finally picked up. The enforcer delivered a warning so incredibly cold that Damien never dared to dial that number again yet. The psychological poison still took root. In the quiet hours, I began to gaslight my own reality, wondering if the monster had changed. That is the insidious nature of trauma. It slowly rewrites your memories, until violent abuse starts wearing the mask of passion. Never let the heavy ache of midnight loneliness trick you into walking backward into a cage you fought so hard to escape. The past is a ghost you cannot trust. My therapist called it traumatic bonding. My brain was wired to connect this monster with my survival. And you cannot simply erase 4 years of harsh conditioning. I endured literal physical withdrawals, secretly wondering if I was the villain. My doctor laid out the cold facts. Did he strike you? Yes. Did he choke you? Yes. But in the silent midnight hours, logic loses its grip. I would type desperate texts to Damien, my thumb trembling over the send button. I wanted to surrender, and that urge terrified me. Listen to me. Healing is never a straight line, sometimes. Real strength just means deleting a toxic message before it destroys your hard-won peace. Just 3 days before the courtroom battle, Kyle discovered me sitting alone in the dark at 2 a.m, completely swallowed by the haunting echoes of my past. Kyle sat across from me in the dark, keeping a respectful distance, and asked if I needed to speak. The dam broke. I sobbed into my hands, confessing I was trapped in memories of the good times, the sweet apologies, the gentle tears. I whispered that it was not always bad. Kyle did not flinch. He delivered a heavy truth. Abusers feed you just enough warmth to make you question the nightmare. He knew this sick rhythm well, having watched his father run the same scam on his mother for 15 years. She forgave the monster because she needed the illusion to be real. I wiped my eyes, ashamed of my fragility. Kyle stopped me, reminding me I am simply human. True resilience is not about never feeling weak. It is about recognizing the edge before you step off, trembling. I admitted my most terrifying secret. I almost called Damien tonight. When I admitted I wanted to return, the air turned suffocating. Kyle leaned forward, delivering a brutal reality check. He told me straight. If you go back, he will end your life. Maybe not today, but eventually, a violent strike will land wrong. Trauma brainwashes you into focusing on fake apologies instead of the actual violence. Those apologies are merely intermissions in a tragedy. His voice dropped as he revealed a heavy truth. He gave this exact speech to his mother 3 weeks before she died. She refused to listen. Kyle looked deep into my eyes and whispered, "Do not be sorry. Just be alive. Here is a lesson we all must carry sometimes. True survival requires burning the bridge, so you cannot retreat." Breaking down in tears, I begged Kyle to take my phone and erase the monster's number for good. I confessed I simply could not trust my own fragile heart. Kyle calmly took the phone from my hands and deleted Damien from my contacts. The toxic lifeline was finally severed. Fast forward to the morning of the custody hearing. I stood trembling in a borrowed blazer as my lawyer dictated our survival plan. Stick to the cold facts, show zero emotion. The judge only cares about hard evidence, and I was terrified my voice would fail. Stick with me here, because this is where it gets real. As we stepped through those heavy doors, my stomach violently dropped. Damien stood in the hallway wearing a slick, tailored suit, looking exactly like the charming man I fell for years ago. Always remember this. A highly polished exterior is often just a flawless mask for the darkest intentions. The monster was fully prepared to play the heartbroken victim. The moment our eyes locked, my heart raced. My damaged instincts screamed at me to run right back into his familiar arms. Damien flashed a gentle smile, acting as if 4 years of pure hell never happened. For a split second, I was deeply tempted by the fantasy then. Reality hit, the vivid memory of bright red blood on my little boy's face flashed behind my eyes, snapping the toxic illusion in half. My spine stiffened, and I walked past him without a word. Inside the courtroom, we faced a stone-faced judge. My lawyer went straight for the throat, presenting medical records, brutal photographs, and an unhinged voicemail of Damien screaming violent threats. His lawyer tried to spin a sick narrative, claiming I faked the abuse. The lesson here: when manipulators try to twist your story, the cold, undeniable truth will always be your greatest armor. The judge remained stone-faced, calling me to the stand. The heavy silence of the room pressed against my chest. I stepped up, legs shaking, swore on the Bible, and braced for the impact. My lawyer, Patricia, started gently before stepping into the dark. Did he physically harm you? I swallowed my terror and listed a living nightmare. I recounted the heavy punches, the choking, and the sickening sound of my ribs snapping twice. I admitted Damien fed smooth lies to the doctors while I sat paralyzed by fear. Then came the devastating blow. Patricia asked about the night I escaped. My voice broke as I revealed how Damien shoved our little boy, splitting his head until he bled. A harsh truth of survival sometimes. Seeing an innocent soul suffer is the only thing that gives you the fierce strength to finally walk away. My raw honesty completely dominated the silent courtroom. Damien's lawyer stepped up to the microphone, trying the slimiest tactic imaginable. He actually weaponized my mental health, asking if my anxiety caused me to hallucinate the abuse. Patricia screamed in objection, but he kept pushing, claiming I was never physically trapped. I was done hiding. I fired back, detailing how Damien took my keys and tracked every move I made. When this smug rookie asked why I did not just walk out, I leaned into the mic. You and I are unpacking the heavy truth today. I asked him if he ever had to calculate whether running would get him murdered faster than staying. I admitted I stayed because I falsely believed it was safer. Here is a vital lesson. Never let sheer terror dictate your fate. The courtroom went dead silent. The real battle had just begun. The judge finally dropped the hammer. I was granted temporary sole custody, leaving Damien with a pathetic 2 hours of supervised visits. The gavel hit the block, securing my massive victory. But as I tried to exit, Damien blocked the aisle, triggering my deepest survival instincts. He leaned in, whispering that this was far from over. Before he could finish his threat, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was Kyle, looking like the Grim Reaper. His voice was a dangerous rumble as he informed my abuser that it was, in fact, over. Damien tried to act tough, demanding Kyle step aside, but he was completely outmatched. His fragile confidence shattered against Kyle's terrifying, ice-cold aura. A simple lesson for tonight: true strength never needs to shout. Damien finally backed down, humiliated. Let us step into the dark together, because the aftermath is rarely easy. Kyle guided me out, leaving Damien choking on his own toxic obsession. Later, I sat in the dead silence of the safe house. The court papers declared me free, but the air felt too thick to breathe suddenly. My phone violently vibrated. An unknown number, I answered, and that familiar creeping voice slid into my ear. Damien. He laughed, a hollow sound, asking if I really believed a mob boss could build a wall high enough to keep him out. He promised I would always be his. Then the line went dead. I was left entirely paralyzed in the shadows while my little boy dreamed nearby. Here is a truth we all must face eventually. Walking away from the fire is only the first step. Surviving the bitter ashes they leave behind is the real battle. Every shadow on the wall made my breath catch. Every creak in the floorboard sent adrenaline straight through my chest. At 4:17 in the morning, I dialed Kyle. He answered before the second ring. I choked out the threat Damien made, and he wasted no breath on empty comfort. 20 minutes later, he came through my door, sweeping the rooms with cold precision. He absorbed every detail of that phone call, his jaw set like stone. Within seconds, he had his tech team hunting the burner phone signal. Kyle was completely finished playing defense. The simple lesson here is absolutely clear. When wolves come circling your home in the dead of night, you do not just lock the front door, you find a much darker wolf to stand guard. Stick with me here, because this is where the tension truly breaks. I stared up at Kyle, asking if he could actually keep us safe. His answer was a low, heavy rumble. I can do a lot of things, he said. He locked down the perimeter, placing men at every entry point. We waited 3 agonizing days before Damien finally cracked. Dante kicked open the office door, slamming a laptop onto the desk. The screen showed a miserable gas station in East Hartford. Through the static, there he was. 3 seconds of his face filling up a rusted truck, and the hunt was officially on. The life lesson remains a quiet truth. Never rush blindly into the storm. When you deal with a deeply toxic obsession, sometimes you just have to sit back patiently and wait for them to make that fatal, arrogant mistake. Damien was leaving a sloppy trail of pure desperation. Dante discovered my ex used a stolen credit card to buy cheap liquor before vanishing into a roadside motel. We are talking flickering neon signs and stained carpets. A place barely 4 miles from where I was trying to sleep. Kyle stared at the map as Dante pulled up the hacked GPS from that rusted truck. The screen was completely covered in jagged red pins. Damien was running a precise grid search around the city, checking local shelters and known properties. The predator was circling us, moving closer every single hour. Listen to me, because here is a life lesson you should never forget. Pure desperation turns an ordinary fool into a dangerous machine. When someone has absolutely nothing left to lose, you must constantly stay 3 moves ahead of their dark, twisted madness. Kyle ordered complete surveillance on that motel room, his patience entirely gone. Later that evening, he walked into the safe house, and the heavy atmosphere suddenly shifted. I was kneeling on the floor, softly teaching my little boy Noah how to loop his shoelaces, when my son pulled a crooked knot together. His sweet laughter hit Kyle right in the chest. You could see a rare ache in his eyes for a childhood he never had. But the second Noah saw the dark figure in the doorway, he froze. Pure terror washed over his tiny face, and he scrambled behind my back. I gently tried to bridge the gap between them. The life lesson here is profound. True power is not merely the ability to crush the monsters at the gate. Real strength is possessing that violent capacity, yet choosing to be incredibly soft for the fragile hearts seeking your shelter. Kyle knew the deep scars of trauma all too well. He slowly lowered his massive frame, making himself as small as possible for my son. I saw the grim shadow in Kyle's eyes immediately. We stepped out into the hallway, and the door clicked shut. Then he broke the cold news. He told me about the motel, the map, and the tightening noose of Damien's grid search. The warmth completely drained from my trembling face. Kyle offered to move us across state lines to hide us forever. I fiercely shook my head, refusing to be chased from my own life ever again. Listen closely to this life lesson. Running away might give you a fleeting moment to catch your breath, but running is never surviving. Sooner or later, you must firmly plant your feet in the mud and stare the storm directly in the eyes. This was where our dynamic completely fractured. I refused to pack my bags, totally exhausted from constantly checking the rearview mirror. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I admitted I had no idea how to protect my boy. The room turned freezing cold. Kyle stepped closer, his deep voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He offered me the permanent solution, one single word, and Damien ceases to exist, no trace left behind. I gasped, calling it murder. Kyle barely blinked, coldly correcting me. He called it protection. I wept, saying I could never ask him to do that. Kyle stared right through me. You are not asking, he said. I am offering. A harsh life lesson lives here. When the rules of a broken world fail to protect the innocent, you are often forced to decide exactly how much of your soul you will trade for a quiet night of peace. Picture this heavy, suffocating silence. I asked Kyle why a man like him would burn his entire world down for me. He went incredibly still. He told me that if he had this kind of power at 17, his brutal father would never have seen 18, and his own mother would still be alive. The raw pain in his voice was crushing. I wept, begging him for a way out that did not end in a shallow grave. Kyle simply nodded, turning our safe house into an armed fortress. Guards shadowed my every single step. This suffocating tension bled right into little Noah, who suddenly stopped eating and clung desperately to my hand all day. The simple life lesson is this: you can never truly hide your internal panic from the fragile people who love you. They will always feel the dark thunder of your storm, no matter how brightly you force yourself to smile. I buried my face in my trembling hands. How could I stop the terror when every shadow wore Damien's face? Every simple knock felt like a heavy hammer against my ribs. Thursday night, at exactly 9:34, my phone shattered the quiet. It was my mother trembling uncontrollably. Damien had found her house. I felt my blood turn to ice. She whispered that he stood on her porch for 20 minutes, screaming into the dark about his rights, swearing he knew we were hiding in Hartford. When I asked if she called the police, my mother delivered a crushing reality. The law would not intervene until he physically broke a door or a bone. Here is a devastating life lesson. The system is rarely designed to catch you before you fall. Often, you simply have to forge your own armor and become your own absolute shield against the dark. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? The court paper only shielded me, leaving my poor mother entirely exposed. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out, but I swallowed the bitter panic and begged her to flee immediately. Hanging up, I sat in the pitch-black room, listening to my son breathing, feeling the walls rapidly closing in. Friday morning arrived with a devastating blow. Kyle was pulled from a tense meeting when Dante delivered the total nightmare. Damien had walked into the local police precinct and filed kidnapping charges against me. My abuser was actually playing the victim, claiming I stole his child and defied the court, and the police were listening to him. The life lesson here is deeply brutal. Truly toxic people will gladly twist the very laws designed to protect the innocent into a heavy weapon to maintain control. Celine played by the rules, but the truth means nothing to a master manipulator. Damien unleashes his lawyers, twisting the story to paint her as a spiteful ex hiding his son. Dante warns them that these fake charges will fall apart, but not before dragging her through pure misery. The police demand a formal interview and a search of the safe house. Kyle completely loses it, refusing to let them breach the sanctuary, but fighting back only makes her look guilty. How do you explain invisible scars to officers who treat abuse like a simple argument? Kyle chokes down his anger and sets up the meeting with his sharpest attorney. Then comes the final gut punch. Damien subpoenas her employment records. The lesson here is timeless. A well-dressed lie will run a marathon before the quiet truth even ties its shoes. Pull up a chair and sit with me, because we need to talk about the lies we tell ourselves. Dante delivers the crushing news over the phone. The authorities suspect Kyle is financially trapping Celine, running her life just like Damien did, only with unlimited wealth instead of physical threats. Kyle goes completely rigid. The accusation hits him like a freight train, mostly because a quiet shadow in his mind knows it is true. He used his massive empire to build her an airtight safety net. His heavily guarded safe houses came with an invisible leash keeping her close. He hangs up completely frozen. This terrifying syndicate boss suddenly has no idea what to do next. He finds her later, peacefully, folding clothes in the beautiful house he bought for her. Here is a simple, heavy truth. You can paint a cage with solid gold, but the person locked inside is still a prisoner. The laundry basket hits the wooden floor with a loud crack, as Kyle explains the kidnapping allegations. Celine completely breaks down. She showed up to every single visitation. Damien was the one who never bothered to appear. Now the man who tortured her is playing the victim. Kyle gently warns her that skipping the police interview will trigger an immediate arrest warrant. She gasps for air, the nightmare closing in around her, but then he brings up the financial control rumors. Instantly, the panic in her eyes vanishes, replaced by a gaze made of pure ice. She looks right through his soul and asks if he is trying to control her. The question cuts him deep. He stammers, trying to deny it, but she sharply points out how he dictates her schedule and guards her door. Remember this. True support means handing someone their power back, never keeping it for yourself. Celine unleashes her anger, screaming that he offered to make Damien vanish without once asking what she actually wanted. Kyle holds up his hands, swearing he only wanted to protect her, but she is shaking with raw fury. She spent 4 agonizing years trapped with a monster who controlled her clothes, her friends, and her mind now. She let another powerful man do the exact same thing behind a mask of generosity. Kyle tenses up, reminding her he has never raised a hand to her. Celine delivers a devastating reality check. He made himself so essential that she cannot even function without him. She traded a bloody cage for a comfortable one. The silence in the room becomes heavy and suffocating. Kyle feels his heart sink, knowing deep down she is right. Good intentions will never erase the deep damage caused by toxic control. A sickening wave of realization washes over Kyle. He has turned into a mirror image of his own ruthless father, confusing dominance with genuine affection. His voice is barely a whisper when he asks what she needs him to do, wiping the tears from her face. Celine begs for the space to figure out who she is without a man pulling her strings. Kyle gives a slow, painful nod and turns toward the door. As his hand rests on the knob, she quietly thanks him for everything. He cannot even find the words to reply outside. He orders his men to keep their distance but to never lose sight of her, driving alone into the dark. He grieves the loss of a woman he never truly owned by Saturday morning. Celine sits in a cold police interrogation room that smells like cheap coffee. Here is the hardest lesson: if you really love someone, you must swallow your fear and let them breathe. Stick with me, because the energy in this interrogation room is about to shift. Celine sits up straight, her shark of a lawyer, placing a recorder on the metal table. The detective goes on the attack, repeating the lie that she kept Damien from his son. Celine fires back with absolute ice in her veins. She drove to that custody center 3 times, and he never bothered to show up. Her lawyer slides a folder across the desk, time-stamped sign-in sheets. Hard proof she was there while her ex was nowhere to be found. The detective backpedals, demanding to know where little Noah is staying. Patricia shuts that down immediately, citing the legal right to protect a child from a violently abusive man. Life teaches us a simple rule for moments like these. When the world tries to back you into a dark corner, bring your receipts and absolutely refuse to flinch. The tension in the air is suffocating. Celine's lawyer looks the detective dead in the eye, stating that revealing Noah's location is a literal death sentence. They manage to negotiate a supervised visit. But then the police drop a massive bomb. Damien is spreading rumors that Celine is sleeping with her boss, Kyle Varelli, and that Kyle is using his fortune to keep her trapped. Celine grips the edge of the table until her knuckles turn white, fiercely denying every single word. Kyle gave her a safe place when she had absolutely nothing, without ever asking for a favor in return. Her attorney instantly terminates the interview, tearing into the detective for suggesting a woman cannot receive help without selling herself. Let me tell you a secret about this world. Genuine protection never comes with a hidden invoice. Celine escapes to the quiet hallway, gasping for air. Patricia paces the narrow hallway, vibrating with anger. Damien's legal team set a trap to plant toxic seeds of doubt in everyone's minds. They do not need actual evidence. Their only goal is to paint Celine as a manipulative woman who uses rich men, completely destroying her credibility. A sick feeling rises in Celine's throat. She suddenly realizes the only way to survive this war is to cut every single tie with Kyle. No more financial support, no more late phone calls. Absolute independence. Sometimes you have to set fire to your own safety net just to prove your legs still work. That evening, Celine makes the hardest phone call of her life. She tells Kyle she is leaving the safe house so Damien cannot use it against her. The crushing silence on his end says it all. He hates the idea, but her mind is made up. Finally, the boss quietly caves, sending his men to help her pack. You and I have seen enough hard times to know this is just the quiet before the storm. Celine drags her heavy bags into a freezing studio apartment in a rough part of town. The window latches are rusted shut, but the space is finally hers. No Mafia soldiers watching the perimeter, just a mother protecting her boy. As police sirens bleed through the thin walls, serious doubt starts eating at her mind. Then her cell phone buzzes. No caller ID, she answers, and the blood instantly drains from her face. Damien's chilling whisper slithers through the tiny speaker. He lets out a dark laugh, mocking her pathetic attempt to run away from her powerful protector. The monster has been sitting outside her building for 3 whole days. He watched her carry those boxes. He watched her tuck her son into bed. The lesson here is brutally terrifying. Real monsters never just let you walk away. Celine forgets how to breathe. The air in her lungs turns to ice as Damien brags about how isolated she is, with no one left to hear her scream. The line goes dead. She sits frozen until a new sound reaches her ears. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echo down the cheap hallway, stopping right outside her door. 3 slow knocks. It is the kind of sound that paralyzes you to the bone. Pure adrenaline floods her veins. Celine snatches little Noah from his bed, clamping a hand over his mouth, and scrambles into the tiny bathroom. Damien sings her name, violently rattling the front doorknob. Then comes the sickening click of the main lock giving way. He is inside, hands trembling violently. She secures the flimsy bathroom lock and dials for help. In a breathless whisper, she begs the police to hurry. When absolute darkness finds you, raw survival instinct is all you really have left. A distant voice on the phone promises that officers are on the way. Through the thin walls, Celine hears Damien destroying her fragile new life. Glass shatters against the floor. Heavy furniture flips over. He calls out to her in a twisted rhythm that makes her stomach turn. Noah whimpers softly against her chest as hot tears spill into his hair. The heavy boots finally stop right outside the bathroom. The brass knob slowly turns locked suddenly. Damien punches the door panel so hard the frame bows inward. He roars, throwing his full weight against the cheap wood until it splinters. Celine lets out a gut-wrenching scream just as police sirens bleed into the dark alleyway. Damien freezes. He presses his face to the cracked wood, hissing that she will never escape him before running out. Celine collapses to the floor. The deepest trauma always lives in the silent aftermath of the storm. Let's pause right here. This is where pride has to die for survival to begin. Celine realizes she cannot fight a war against a monster with bare hands. She dials Kyle and whispers 3 desperate words. I need help. He makes it across the city in 11 flat minutes. Heavy tires screech through the street, followed by rapid footsteps storming up the stairs. He bursts through the ruined doorway, ignoring the cops and the shattered glass. His dark eyes scan her trembling body, searching for any sign of blood. Celine shakes her head, burying her face in her son's hair. Kyle slowly turns his lethal gaze toward the police, demanding a full report. When an officer mutters an excuse about lacking witnesses to issue a manhunt, the room's temperature drops 10 degrees. Kyle radiates pure, unfiltered rage. The system is broken, sometimes. The only real protection you have is the kind you build yourself. The air grew heavy the moment Kyle lowered his voice to an icy chill. The officer tried to brush the assault off as just another domestic dispute, but Kyle stepped right into his space. A younger cop nervously suggested I visit the station tomorrow, but Kyle shut that down. He dictated terms like a man who runs empires. I give my statement here, and a patrol car stays parked outside until Damien is locked up. The older cop stammered about protocol, but Kyle stared straight through him, telling him to make it work. The officer backed down instantly. Here is a simple truth to remember. You must always stand firm when protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Once the room finally cleared, Kyle gently crouched down in front of me, seeing my total exhaustion. I sat completely frozen, my veins flooded with leftover adrenaline. Kyle quietly told me to pack a bag. Panic washed over me as I worried a safe house would be used against my case. That is when Kyle dropped a heavy truth. I was moving into his personal penthouse. I argued it would ruin everything, but he did not care. When I cried that I was not safe anywhere, he looked at me and said I should at least be unsafe somewhere he could actually protect me. Sometimes accepting a shield is the only way to survive a brutal war. Looking down at my sleeping son, I finally gave in. We arrived at his massive 42nd floor penthouse, overlooking the city like a modern throne. But the most striking thing was the absolute silence. It was that untouchable quiet only true power can buy. Marco hauled our bags inside while Kyle disabled a security system built for a military base. Turning to me, the hardened boss softened his posture and pointed out the guest room, feeling entirely out of place in this luxury. I whispered that I did not know how to thank him. Kyle loosened his tie, looking exhausted. He told me not to thank him yet, because we needed to discuss what happens next. You and I both know the real vendetta is just beginning. I asked if it could wait, and he promised I was finally safe. I wanted to believe his words, but safety still felt like an illusion. I tucked Noah into a bed that cost more than my car, refusing to let my tears fall. Here is a quiet truth for you. The deepest scars do not bleed. They just keep you awake at night. While Damien prowled the dark streets below, I felt my options vanishing. I woke up and for one brief second, everything felt fine. Then the brutal reality of my stalker hit me like a train. I walked into the kitchen to find Kyle looking like a millionaire hitman, wearing a suit that cost more than my rent. A gourmet breakfast was waiting. I tried to express my gratitude, but he bluntly admitted his enforcer Marco bought it. We shared a deeply tired look, silently confessing neither of us had slept a wink. The tension was incredibly thick as we sipped our bitter coffee. Then Kyle set his mug down and declared that we had to end this nightmare permanently. Here is a solid life lesson. No matter how much money you have, true peace of mind is the only real luxury in this world. We were talking about a permanent solution. Kyle laid out the cold facts. Damien broke the restraining order, enough for a warrant. Dante had already tracked him to a cheap motel. I wanted to call the cops, but Kyle shut that down. The police were buried in bureaucracy, and by the time they moved, Damien would vanish. Kyle pitched a dark alternative. He would send his crew to snatch my ex, hold him captive, and hand him over with hard evidence. I freaked out, calling it literal kidnapping. Kyle smoothly rebranded the act as a citizen arrest. He made it crystal clear he was not asking for my permission. The lesson here is crucial. The official rules will not always protect you sometimes. Taking control of your safety means bending the law just enough to ensure you survive. Looking back, I finally saw the real Kyle Varley. He was a dangerous boss who made massive problems disappear now. He wanted to weaponize that exact darkness just for me. I nervously asked what would happen if things went sideways, and he did not blink. He promised to handle the fallout, dropping a heavy reality check. He was not there to play the hero. He wanted to give me the power to stop being afraid. That hit me deep, considering fear had been my baseline for 4 long years. Here is a lesson we can all learn. Just surviving a toxic situation is never actually living. You have to fight back. I finally snapped out of my paralysis and told him do it. Kyle locked in. He ordered me to stay hidden inside with Marco guarding the door, warning me to call if anything felt wrong. I asked what he was going to do, and Kyle gave an ice-cold answer. He grabbed his jacket and told me he was going to end this. I learned later that the Starlight Inn was the kind of grim place where dreams flatline. Kyle parked 2 blocks down, watching the motel through tinted windows while Dante checked the security feeds. Room 23 showed 0 movement for 40 minutes. Kyle scanned the layout in total silence. 2 floors, useless cameras, and 4 heavy hitters waiting. The police were 30 minutes out with a warrant, but Kyle no longer cared. If Damien resisted, Kyle was ready to put him in the ground. Here is a life lesson for you. When a quiet, patient man finally gets angry, you should probably start running. His men covered the back exit and the trap was set. Kyle and Dante approached the motel room, and the air was dead silent. Kyle knocked hard, but nobody answered. Dante used a master key, and the door swung open to reveal terrifying chaos. Empty bottles were everywhere, and the bed was wrecked. The walls were covered in secret photos of me, Noah, and my old safe house. Damien had built a literal stalker shrine, but my ex was gone. Dante whispered that the creep knew they were coming. The back window was wide open with fresh scuff marks. Right at that moment, Marco called Kyle, and the boss felt his blood run ice cold. Marco frantically reported that I was missing from the penthouse. Here is a lesson you and I can both learn. Never assume you have the upper hand until the game is truly over, because the board can flip in a second. I know Kyle was absolutely losing his mind. Marco told him he just turned his back for 5 minutes, and Noah and I vanished. Kyle ordered his men to find me, warning them that if Damien had me, someone would die. But here is the truth. I made this dangerous choice on my own. I stood in that penthouse and realized that hiding behind others was getting me nowhere. Damien spent 4 years making me feel helpless, and I was done playing the victim. I had received a text from an unknown number, demanding I meet at Bushnell Park, or spend my life looking over my shoulder. Every red flag was waving. But I went anyway. Listen, sometimes you have to face the monster in the dark to realize it is just shadows. I was completely terrified. But I was finally done listening to fear. I grabbed Noah, wrapped him up tightly, and sneaked out while Marco was distracted. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. My heart beating out of my chest. I hopped into a cab I could barely afford and told the driver to head to Bushnell Park. He saw the terror in my eyes, but I just told him to drive. 20 minutes later, I stood at the park entrance, clutching Noah by his hand. Scanning the crowds for my ex, there he was, sitting under a dead oak tree. He looked absolutely horrible. He was thin, unshaven, and radiating miserable energy. He was even wearing a faded jacket I bought him years ago when things were okay. He stood up and smirked, saying he knew I would come. Honestly, holding on to a painful past is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. I tried to keep my composure as I asked what he wanted. Damien used his classic manipulator line, claiming he just wanted his family back. He swore he made mistakes but promised he could change. How many times had I heard this speech after every broken rib? After every terrifying night locked in the bathroom, he would feed me the same twisted lie. But I was finally awake, believing his lies used to be easier than packing my bags. I looked him dead in the eyes and said the magic word. No. It felt like stepping off a steep cliff, but in the absolute best way possible. His expression instantly twisted from a sad puppy to pure rage. He hissed that I did not mean it, but I stood my ground. Here is a major life lesson. Setting firm boundaries will always anger the exact people who used to benefit from you having none. You and I probably both know what it is like to hit an absolute breaking point. I called Damien out right then and there. I reminded him how he shoved our little boy Noah into a table, splitting his head open, and how he threatened me when I tried to stop him. He pulled his classic excuse, blaming the alcohol, but I was so completely done with his pity party. I pulled Noah close and told him we deserved a life without fear. For a split second, I thought he might actually leave instead. His hand shot out like a viper, grabbing my wrist so hard it bruised instantly. He hissed that I was his property. Noah screamed as pain shot up my arm, but something inside me finally snapped. I did not cry, I ignited. You cannot keep a fire trapped forever without it blowing up in your face. I was officially done shrinking myself to fit into the dark, suffocating corners of that man's fragile ego. The air in the room felt thick and heavy. But years of suppressed terror suddenly vanished, replaced by pure, white-hot survival instinct. I did not blink, I did not flinch. With zero hesitation, I drove my knee upward, striking Damien straight in the groin with a sickening impact. It was a brutal, desperate move, born from the deepest well of a mother's panic. He crumbled to the floor, gasping for air as his grip on me shattered. Sometimes, the only way to break the chains of abuse is to finally realize that the monsters we fear in the dark are just made of flesh and bone, and they break exactly like the rest of us. Cale completely lost his mind when I told him what happened. His voice was pure ice, demanding to know why I tried reasoning with a literal maniac. He reminded me I had just handed a violent psychopath a direct map to our front door, and that Noah and I could have lost our lives. I looked right at him, tears streaming down my pale face, and told him I had to prove the fear no longer owned me. Cale went completely silent, his hard eyes softening for a second as he asked if it worked. I admitted the terror was still there, but the running stopped today. The bravest thing you can ever do is look your deepest fear in the eye and refuse to take another step backward. Up in his penthouse, with Noah safe, we stared at poured whiskey we could not stomach. The room grew suffocatingly heavy as Cale looked me dead in the eye, delivering a brutal reality check. He warned me that Damien was completely unhinged, a man who viewed restraining orders as nothing more than useless scraps of paper. Cale laid out two unforgiving choices. We could wait for Damien to put me or my son in the hospital before the law finally decided to care. Or Cale could make the man permanently disappear tonight. No body, no evidence, just a ghost. I flashed back to 4 agonizing years of trauma, remembering how easily the system abandons the vulnerable. When I asked what would happen to him, he did not even blink. Sometimes in this harsh world, you have to draw your own line in the sand when nobody else will protect the ones you love. Cale spoke with a chilling calm, explaining exactly how Damien would fade into a forgotten cold case. It was the terrifying, unshakable confidence of a true Underworld boss. I battled the heavy weight of my own conscience for a moment. But then I remembered my little boy crying in the dark. I realized morality is a quiet luxury I could no longer afford. I told Cale to make the call. Yet the second his finger hit the dial pad, I stopped him. I demanded to be the one who set the trap, if I was orchestrating this nightmare. I needed to own every single piece of it. Cale was genuinely struck by that. He tossed me a burner phone, and my hands trembled wildly as I dialed the monster I used to love. Facing your demons head-on is the only way to take your stolen power back. The call connected instantly, and my stomach dropped. I drew a shaky breath and demanded a face-to-face meeting. No police, no lawyers. I told him to meet me at the old abandoned warehouse on the edge of town at 9 tonight. Damien paused, his paranoia creeping in as he wondered if it was a trap. I fed him a desperate lie, claiming I just wanted to fix our broken family. He bought it completely. Abusers always harbor that sick, twisted arrogance, believing their victims will inevitably crawl back to them. The moment I hung up, Cale made cryptic calls to his enforcers. He told me the crew was set, but I had to stay behind. I wanted to watch him fall. But sometimes, stepping away and letting karma take the wheel is the most empowering move a survivor can make. Let us look at this moment together, you and I. I was sitting in that shadowed penthouse, holding my sleeping child. Waiting for the Mafia hit, I just ordered on the man who used to tuck this same boy into bed. I knew Cale was right. Once you step into the underworld, the stain never truly washes out, but the universe has a wicked sense of humor. 10 agonizing minutes passed before my phone shattered the quiet. It was Cale, and his voice was colder than winter wind. Damien had not walked into the warehouse alone. He brought a loaded weapon, and he brought a hostage. Cale was seething with absolute rage, and my blood turned to ice when he dropped the horrifying truth. The hostage shivering in the dark was my own mother. My carefully laid plan was falling apart. Through the phone, absolute chaos spilled into the quiet room. I could hear Cale barking furious orders, car doors slamming, and the soul-crushing sound of my mother screaming in terror. The trap I so carefully laid had completely backfired now. The woman who raised me was in the crosshairs of a desperate man, and the guilt rested entirely on my shoulders, in a blur. I was out the door and speeding through the city. The warehouse looked like a rusted nightmare bathed in harsh moonlight. 3 black SUVs surrounded the perimeter, with Cale's enforcers moving like a military strike force. Before I could jump, Marco plays the loyal soldier, begging her to stay in the car. But Celine is done taking orders. Her voice drops to a deadly whisper as she reminds him she does not work for his boss. She rips her arm away and bolts, dodging 2 of Cale's massive guards. She kicks open the heavy metal doors. The air inside hits her like a physical blow. smelling of old engine oil and raw panic. Harsh lights throw jagged shadows across the room. Cale stands nearby with his hands raised, desperately trying to talk Damien down. But the scene in the center stops her heart entirely. Damien is pressing a weapon directly against her mother's head. Linda is completely frozen. It is a tragic lesson in fear sometimes. When faced with pure evil, innocent people simply shut down. Damien is completely losing his grip on reality. His voice is raw, screaming that since they took his family, he will take hers. Cale tries to project calm, explaining that Linda has absolutely no part in this Mafia feud. But you cannot reason with a man who has surrendered to madness. He knows exactly what the Varelli family does in the dark. Suddenly, the shouting dies into a suffocating silence as Celine steps into the harsh glare of the lights. Damien's face twists with shock, blinding rage, and a deeply toxic obsession. He demands that every mobster leave the room so they can be alone. Cale immediately steps in front of Celine, acting as a human shield, refusing to back down. Damien just tightens his shaking grip on the steel and swears he will fire. The madman presses the cold steel harder against Linda's head, blaming Celine for his own destructive choices. In the shadows, Cale's men circle like wolves, scanning for a clean shot, but Damien is cunning, keeping the weeping mother positioned right in front of him. Celine knows she has to make a desperate play. She tells him she will stay, but only if he lets her mother walk. He calls her a liar. But here is a heavy truth about toxic people. They always harbor a stubborn delusion that they are truly loved, no matter what they have done. Celine challenges his ego, demanding that if he ever cared for her, he will let the woman go. She promises not to run, and right there, in the dim light, a sick, deeply twisted spark of hope flashes in his wild eyes. It is that pathetic hope abusers cling to, believing the people they hurt will always come back slowly. Damien lets the mother go. Linda stumbles toward the exit, casting one terrified glance at Celine before disappearing into the night. Now, it is just Celine. She stands 20 feet from the man who made her life an absolute nightmare, surrounded by men who cannot shoot without risking her life. Damien lowers the weapon, his voice cracking as he begs her to say she still loves him. In that heavy silence, Celine finally sees him clearly. The fear washes away. He is not some all-powerful monster. He is just a broken, sad man who only knows the language of violence. She looks him dead in the eyes and delivers the hardest truth of all. She does not love him anymore. Let's look at this breaking point together. With those quiet words, Celine completely shatters him. She admits she truly loved the old version of him, the man who promised a beautiful life. But that man was just a ghost she clung to when the nightmare began. Then she drops the hammer, listing every horrifying thing he did. The night he choked her in front of their child, the isolation, the mind games. Damien is openly weeping now, spitting out desperate apologies. But hollow words don't heal fractured ribs, do they? They don't erase the memory of him shoving their little boy into a table. He begs, swearing to the heavens he can change. Celine just shakes her head. The lesson here is simple. Some betrayals shatter the glass so completely. There is absolutely no putting it back together. She tells him that genuine change means owning up to being the architect of his own chaos. His violence was never about love. But he'll never admit that, because the ugly truth is he destroyed the only woman who actually cared for him. Damien completely crumbles. His hands shaking, he raises the heavy weapon, not at Celine, but right at his own chest, sobbing that there's no point in living without her. Cale steps forward, calling him a massive coward for trying to check out early, instead of facing the consequences. But Celine steps even closer and demands he look her in the eyes, staring into his hollow gaze. She finally realizes what truly drives him. It isn't a thirst for power, it's pure, unfiltered fear. The truth we can all learn is that the monsters we fear most are often just terrified people hiding behind their own rage. Damien is absolutely terrified of being a nobody without her. Every bit of his control was just a mask for his crippling insecurities. Looking down at him, Celine lays out his future. She is leaving him forever. He is going to a concrete cell, losing his little boy. And he is going to rot, but she refuses to let him pull that trigger. You and I both know that true justice means sitting with the ashes of your mistakes every single day. She tells him he has to survive and carry the heavy weight of what he destroyed. Maybe then he'll realize that real love does not leave dark bruises. Utterly defeated, his legs give out. He collapses onto the cold floor, sobbing like a broken child. Cale's men rush in, kicking the weapon away and slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The lesson here is that running from your actions only delays the inevitable collision with reality. Police sirens paint the night in harsh red and blue, washing over the ruined estate. You and I have seen this kind of emotional wreckage before. Damien sits in the back of a cruiser, head in his hands, sobbing Celine's name into the dark glass. But the toxic spell is broken. Cale steps through the chaotic noise. Celine is more than just safe now, she is entirely free. Her friend Linda wraps her in a fierce hug, whispering for her to never apologize for surviving. Then Cale walks over with the final update. They are charging Damien with kidnapping and assault. He is looking at 20 hard years, and losing his parental rights forever. Celine gets sole custody of her boy. The simple truth is this: standing your ground against someone who breaks your spirit is terrifying. But it is the only real way to shatter the cycle and reclaim your life. Celine hears those heavy words, yet her chest feels strangely hollow. She looks up at Cale, asking what happened to his original plan to wipe Damien off the map entirely. Cale just watches her calmly. He explains that clean. Legal justice is what she really needs to move on, even if his darker instincts wanted blood. Right then, Marco steps out of the shadows, gently carrying little Noah. Miraculously, the kid slept through the entire nightmare. Celine pulls her boy tightly to her chest, burying her face in his hair. This was the whole point, not bitter revenge, but keeping her child safe. 4 months slip by in a blur, bringing us straight to the courtroom. Celine sits in the front row, watching the prosecutor finally expose her ex for the violent man he truly is. The lesson here is clear. True peace comes from protecting what you love, not just destroying what you hate. The prosecutor drops a mountain of ugly truths on the courtroom table. Medical records, police reports, and chilling voicemails where Damien flips from a weeping victim to a raging monster in seconds. His lawyer tries the trauma card, but the jury is ice cold. The judge's hammer falls, guilty on all charges. 18 years in a concrete box. Damien snaps his head around, glaring right at Celine. But she doesn't shrink anymore. She holds his gaze with unshakable strength until the guards drag him away outside. Her lawyer gently warns her that winning the legal war is just day one. The emotional bleeding takes a lot longer to stop. A week later, Celine is back at work, returning to a quiet apartment where she can finally exhale. We all need to remember this. Surviving the storm is huge, but doing the quiet work of rebuilding your peace is where the real victory begins. Let's pause and really look at this next moment. You and I, because the heavy silence speaks volumes. Margaret leads Celine up to the top floor, and Celine's stomach is tying itself into knots. Ever since the trial ended, Cale basically vanished. His only communication was a stiff card attached to expensive flowers. Total radio silence. She pushes the heavy door open, and there he sits. Sharp suit, surrounded by that familiar icy aura of control. But when he looks up, his eyes are heavy. He quietly tells her to shut the door then. The untouchable boss sets his pen down and does the absolute unthinkable. He apologizes. He says sorry for pulling her strings, stepping over the line, and treating her like a fragile victim instead of a capable survivor. The big takeaway in life. Sometimes the most powerful move a strong person can make is simply dropping their ego and admitting they were wrong. But Celine is not about to let him throw a pity party. She crosses her arms and tells him straight up that he handed her the exact tools she needed to save herself. Cale looks at the city skyline, dropping a heavy confession. He spent his life trying not to become a controlling monster, yet he knows he crossed the line. He whispers she deserved better. Celine steps closer. She reminds him that when she demanded space, he gave it to her. If Damien had been in his shoes, he would have burned the city down before letting her walk away. Cale murmurs that stepping back doesn't magically erase his mistakes. Celine meets his gaze and says it proves he has the ability to change. They agree to just see where things go organically. No armed guards, no games. The lesson here is clear. Real relationships are built on pure freedom, never on golden handcuffs. Before walking out of that office door, Celine turns back to thank him for seeing the fire in her when she was completely lost in the dark. You can practically see Cale's icy walls melting down. Fast forward a few months, and life is finally letting our girl breathe. She is grinding through night classes and climbing the corporate ladder while the sun is up. Without the suffocating terror of looking over her shoulder, she absolutely thrives, landing a massive promotion. And little Noah, he confidently walks into his kindergarten class, drops his mother's hand, and runs off to play. No panic in his eyes, just a normal kid. Watching his little sneakers hit the floor, Celine feels a profound internal shift. It's the raw, beautiful pride of truly living again. She starts therapy, completely on her own terms. This reminds us of a hard truth. You cannot build a solid new future until you bravely clear out the toxic rubble of your past. Listen closely to this part, because you and I know the mental game is where the real war is fought. Her therapist helps her dig through years of psychological damage, teaching her how to untangle actual threats from leftover ghost stories. The doctor is completely honest with her. Those triggers are never going away entirely. Men who act even a little bit like Damien will always make her chest tight, but as time passes, the volume dial steadily goes down. She learns that healing is a completely messy road. Then, out of nowhere, a cheap envelope arrives from a Connecticut prison. 6 months of peace. Instantly shattered by Damien's jagged handwriting, a familiar chill runs down her spine. She sits there staring at this paper bomb for 20 minutes, almost throwing it away, but the lesson here is tricky. Sometimes we have to look our darkest ghost right in the eyes, just to prove to ourselves that it cannot hurt us anymore. Her hands trembling, she tears the paper open. At first, it's exactly the predictable garbage you'd expect, endless empty apologies, blaming his rough childhood for his violent hands. But halfway down the 3rd page, the tone sharply shifts. The prison forced him into a brutal anger management program, making him stare at his own reflection. For the first time, he admits the ugly truth. He writes that he is a broken man, and he broke her too. He explicitly states he doesn't want her forgiveness. He just asks she give their boy the safe childhood he selfishly tried to steal. Then comes a line that hits like a freight train. He writes that love is never enough when you literally do not know how to be a decent human being. Celine sits in her quiet living room, reading those words 3 times over. Here is the deep truth we walk away with. Personal growth is real, but it never fully erases the deep scars you leave behind on others. I gently fold the crinkled pages, tucking them inside a cardboard box in my closet, right beneath my old winter sweaters. I am not holding on to them to live in the past. They are a chilling reminder of the absolute hell I crawled out of. A full year has passed since that terrifying night at the warehouse, and Cale finally asks me out. He does not try to impress me with some pretentious VIP club. Instead, he takes me to a quiet Italian joint hidden down a back alley. We just sit there sharing warm bread, talking about beautifully ordinary things. No looking over our shoulders, no unspoken threats. Just 2 exhausted people finally breathing. Then he sets his glass down and asks if I ever regret leaving Damien. I admit that I only miss the ghost of the man I thought he was. You can mourn a beautiful fantasy, even after you escape the nightmare. You and I both know how hard letting go is, but stick with me here. I look dead into Cale's eyes, and my voice does not waver. I do not regret walking away. If I had stayed, I would still be covering up fresh bruises, teaching my little boy Noah that love is supposed to be violent. I refused to pass that poison down. I clawed my way out of the dirt and took my life back. Cale gives me this slow, genuine smile and tells me I am extraordinary. We finish our dinner, the city lights glowing through the window. He walks me to my car, and instead of pulling away, he leans in. I meet him halfway. This is not some fairy tale romance. This is 2 battered survivors finding a safe place to land. The most profound love only arrives after you finally learn how to save yourself. When we finally step back, I cannot stop smiling. I drive home with the windows rolled down, the cold air stinging my cheeks as I blast the loud music Damien absolutely despised. I pay the babysitter and carry my sleeping boy to his bed. Noah blinks awake just long enough to mumble about a dream filled with dinosaurs and ice cream. He whispers that he loves me, and as his eyes drift shut, reality washes over me. For 4 terrifying years, I was just a ghost, desperately kicking to keep my head above water. But tonight, I am actually alive, sure. I still check the deadbolts 3 times before I sleep, because trauma casts a long shadow. But my mind is finally quiet, and Damien is staring at a gray wall for the next 18 years. Real freedom is not just walking out of the cage. It is learning how to sing in the open sky. Let us jump forward a bit, because I want to show you how this story really ends. 2 years fall off the calendar, and we find ourselves right back in the same cold boardroom, where my nightmare started. But the picture is entirely different now. I am no longer the shivering girl hiding in the corner. I am sitting dead center at the head of the heavy oak table. The old boss stepped down, and Cale named me director of operations. I command the room, and I do not take a single ounce of disrespect from anyone. The scared woman who hid her fading bruises in oversized sweaters is completely gone. Today, I wear sharp, custom suits, running the floor with steady hands. My team looks up to me because they know the fire I walked through. The lesson here is simple. You do not just ask for respect in this harsh world. You survive the flames and build your own throne. The heavy boardroom doors click shut, and the silence of my victory hangs thick in the air. Kyle steps inside, sliding a thick envelope across my polished desk. Inside is a check for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every single cent is back pay for the endless years I spent suffocating under Damien's reign of terror. Kyle looks right past my walls, telling me I earned this by surviving the unspeakable with absolute grace. The tears finally spill over, hot and heavy against my cheeks. He tells me to take the money and build my empire. Hours later, all that heavy atmosphere fades the second I pick up Noah from school. My sweet boy is buzzing with innocent joy over a messy science project, entirely untouched by the violent world I shielded him from. We often forget this, but the absolute greatest victory you can ever win is just letting a kid be a kid. Noah is practically vibrating with that wild, untamed energy only a 7-year-old has. He begs for greasy pizza and eagerly asks if Kyle can tag along. I agree, and soon we find ourselves in a gritty, neon-lit corner joint that serves slices the size of hubcaps. 20 minutes bleed by before Kyle pushes through the glass door. He is still wearing his tailored suit, but the tie is undone, giving him the tired look of a man stepping off the midnight shift. Noah immediately launches into a chaotic rant about baking soda volcanoes. It is pure nonsense, but Kyle anchors his intense eyes on my boy, giving him the exact same respect he would give a billionaire. I watch them from across the chipped table, and the last bit of ice around my heart simply melts away. I realize in that quiet moment that this is my real family now. Have you ever had a moment where the past just stops hurting? The city park feels different tonight. No unseen threats in the shadows. Just tired people under the amber streetlights. Kyle breaks the quiet, asking if I still think about Damien. I do not even flinch. I admit the terror used to consume me, but tonight he is nothing but a ghost then. I turn the mirror on Kyle, asking about the father who broke his spirit. Kyle lets out a slow, heavy breath. He confesses that some souls are too shattered to piece back together, and bleeding on their sharp edges will only destroy you. He spent decades wanting to save me, but in the end I saved myself. He handed me the tools, but I swung the heavy hammer. It is a harsh reality we all must face. True healing only begins when you finally decide to rescue yourself. For the first time in my life, I feel completely bulletproof, not because a dangerous man stands guard at my door, but because I forged my own spirit into iron. Fast forward 5 quiet years. I am sitting in a stunning apartment that I own outright. Noah is 10 now, wildly packing his bags for summer camp. The boy is radiant, his memory completely scrubbed of the dark nights he spent cowering from his father's explosive rage. The doctors call it a blessing, and I know they are right. Shielding him from that agony was my ultimate mission, as he checks off his gear with a bright, easy smile. I sink back into the sofa with a warm coffee. I let the profound weight of my survival wash over me. True peace is brutally hard to earn, but it is so incredibly beautiful when it finally arrives. Kyle and I have been running the board together for 3 solid years now. There is no need for a marriage certificate to prove what we survived. We simply built a quiet sanctuary out of the burning ashes. Kyle had to learn how to be a devoted partner instead of a cold bodyguard, and I had to learn that accepting a protective hand does not make you weak. We talk through our pain instead of breaking things. My phone buzzes with a playful message from him. Demanding dinner, I smile, firing back a sharp reply. Looking out over the glittering Hartford skyline, I see the very streets that once watched me bleed. Meanwhile, 3 hours away in a concrete cage, Damien is rotting in his 13th year of isolation. The man who once terrorized my world has been completely erased. I want you to really think about this next part. Damien is just a phantom now, and phantoms cannot throw punches. I catch my reflection in the window glass, and the woman staring back is a stranger in the best way possible. I am 33, covered in invisible scars, but absolutely unbreakable. I beat an underworld designed to consume me, and here is the brutal truth. I did not survive because a knight rode in to save me. I survived because I finally realized I was my own savior. The lawyers were just background noise to my own knockout punch. Later, standing on the windy balcony of Kyle's penthouse, we look out over the glittering city. Kyle asks if I am scared with Noah away. I nod slowly, but it is a healthy fear. It is the undeniable proof that I finally have something beautiful to lose. Listen closely, because this is where the design of our pain finally makes sense. I turn to Kyle and shatter his darkest belief. For decades, he thought his mother was a tragic failure, wasting her life trying to fix his poisonous father. But I look deep into his eyes and speak the truth. Elena did not fail. She endured the darkness just long enough to burn the meaning of true strength into her son's soul. because of his mother's living nightmare. Kyle knew the exact path to pull me from my own hell, in a haunting way. Elena reached across time to save both of us. Kyle chokes on a quiet sob, gripping my hand tightly. We must always remember this. The agonizing battles fought by those who came before us are often the exact blueprints we need to survive our own wars. You and I have been on quite a journey, and it is haunting to look back at the woman I used to be. I once believed love was supposed to leave you bruised, locked inside a nightmare with no exit, but that girl is buried and gone. In her place stands a fierce survivor. I discovered that courage is not the absence of terror. True strength is feeling your hands shake and executing your escape plan anyway, staring down at the city lights. I know thousands are fighting silent wars behind closed doors, but I finally won mine. My freedom is not found in a bank account or a penthouse. It lives in my son's laughter, in Kyle's steady presence, and in the reflection of a woman who beat the odds. Remember this well. Nobody will ever hand you your freedom. You have to claw your way through the dark to take it. You and I have seen how deep these emotional wounds run, but tonight the toxic cycle is shattered. The most beautiful part is how it happened. No hero dropped from the sky to save her. The nightmare ended because Celine made the agonizing choice to pull herself out of the shadows. It is painfully easy to stay in a poisonous room just because you have grown used to the dark. But she proved that the absolute best revenge against the people who break you is simply living a beautiful, peaceful life. She stripped her past of its power, proving that trauma never gets the final say. It takes staggering courage to walk away from everything you know. But once you do, the entire world opens up. You hold the pen to your own story. Make sure you are the one writing the ending.
One heartbreaking part of Celine's journey is how often she doubts herself. Even after Damien hits her, threatens her, and hurts Noah, part of her still wonders if she overreacted. She remembers the good moments, the apologies, the times Damien cried and promised to change. This emotional confusion is not foolishness. It is trauma. The story shows how abuse damages a person's sense of reality. Damien does not only hurt Celine physically. He makes her question her memory, her judgment, and her worth. He tells her she is exaggerating. He acts loving after violence. He twists the story until she begins to wonder if she is the problem. This is a deeply important educational lesson. Many survivors return to abusive partners not because they enjoy pain, but because trauma creates emotional attachment. The brain begins to associate danger and comfort with the same person. The abuser becomes both the wound and the temporary relief from the wound. Celine's therapist explains this clearly. Leaving can feel like withdrawal. That is why healing takes more than physical escape. It requires support, therapy, distance, and repeated reminders of the truth. Kyle also helps by reminding Celine why she left. He tells her that apologies are not proof of change when the violence keeps returning. His words are harsh, but they help her see clearly. The violence is real, and the apologies are only intermissions. For viewers, this lesson is vital. If someone repeatedly hurts you, and then makes you feel guilty for being hurt, that is manipulation. If you keep doubting your own pain, write down the facts. Talk to someone safe. Trust evidence, not promises. Healing begins when you stop asking, "Was it really that bad?" and start asking, "Why did I believe I deserved it?"